New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Hello, my friends, and thank you for joining us for Spiritual Toolkit today. My name is Brock Ford, and I am your host. And joining me on the team is producer Peter Millard, and a shout out to Reverend Michael for his assistance, and to our network founder, Robert Brzezinski. The idea for this show came from my sincere desire to be of support and a voice for the disenfranchised, the struggling, and hurting people within my reach, to offer spiritual and ethical practices that help others transform their lives, their relationships, and careers. And my hope is that we can support others on their path to their passion, dreams, and best life, building a bridge of understanding, healing, and thriving for all. So we will have guests from all walks of life about real life and navigating its twists and turns triumphantly. And today I have a very special guest, a very dear friend of mine that I met at Unity of San Francisco probably about 25, 26 years ago. And her name is Francine Bravetti. She's an author, a ghostwriter, editor, and book coach. She has over 30 years of journalism experience, a Master's of Arts degree from UCLA, and a Bachelor of Arts in French. She specializes in the areas of memoirs, family histories, autobiographies, press releases, newsletters, business writing, and writing workshops. Francine helps business creators write about their innovations and their service to the consumer, whether it's on their website or in a traditionally published book or ebook. She also serves businesses that want to document their corporate history or that require collateral material. A business journalist of long standing with international experience, Francine's work is very broad, y'all. Francine has the gift of listening to people deeply and drawing out the material that they would not know how to say without her help. Francine offers workshops, one-on-one consultations, and public speaking. And you can contact her for a free consultation on her website, which is Francine at francinebravetti.com. And with that said, y'all, let's welcome Francine Bravetti to Spiritual Toolkit. Hi, Francine. Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. We can hear you just fine. Thank you so much for being here. I've been looking forward to our conversation today. And we go way back. And I actually took some of your classes that you gave and some of your workshops. So I'm very eager to hear more about what you've been doing since then. So you ready to get started, Francine?
I can't wait.
All right. Well, why don't we start with, if you'll share a little bit about the path that led you to this career.
Thank you. Well, I was a business journalist for many years. I started out with a shipping newspaper in New York called the Journal of Commerce. Then I moved to Hong Kong, where I freelanced for 12 years, covering foreign trade and transportation. I came back to the Bay Area at the end of the transformation of Hong Kong into Chinese territory. And then I got a job with the Oakland Tribune covering business, mostly entrepreneurship, high technology, and small business, things like that. And the last a businessman that I wrote a profile of before I left the paper. I wrote a profile of this gentleman named Albert Del Maso, who started his uh, produce and grocery business. And after the story came out in the paper, he hired me to write his autobiography. And right after that, I left the paper and began doing that only, helping people write their books. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Well, you know what, Francine, that's really a ministry. You know, that is a real ministry of love and of spirit that you help other people be able to realize that within them that they can put it on the paper or you write it for them and so that they can talk about it. That's an awesome thing.
Thank you. My heart goes into it. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you feel like it, do
Go
you feel
ahead.
like this is a spiritual journey for you?
Well, I hadn't thought of it that way, but now that you put it that way, yes, I do. Thank you. Because I feel I have an impulse, a desire, a drive to help people draw out memories that they've forgotten for many years, or to
Hmm.
articulate things they didn't know how to say before. I feel that's my gift. And I
Mhm.
love helping them write it or teaching them how to write it. One of the other. Yeah.
I know that is your gift. That's your unique gift that God gave you. And you do it very well and very eloquently as well. And you certainly helped me and the people that were in the class that I was with. But at any rate, so what's the process to get started if someone wants to work with you?
Okay, well, first of all, they have to decide, do they want me to write it or do they want me to help them write it themselves?
Ah.
So if they want me to write it, that requires an awful lot of interviewing and recording and asking them the questions in the direction that they want to go. That has to be transcribed and then it has to be written in narrative form. If they want me to help them write it, that's a whole different process. And I have to help them have the courage to write
Mhm.
what they thought they did not know how to write. That's what I
Mhm.
have to do. Yeah.
You know, you used that word courage, and I'm glad you used it because it instantly reminded me of, I don't know when it was, but so many years ago that I took your class that I remember telling you I was afraid to write what I wanted to write because I was afraid I would upset people. Do you remember that?
Absolutely do.
So
Mhm.
that stuck with me, and I still didn't write it because I was afraid of hurting people or telling stuff that people didn't want me to say. But at any rate, but now it's all come out. So, but thanks to you and thank you.
Well, I'm glad I gave you a kick in the pants to do that.
You did.
Yeah.
So, what's the process of getting someone who wants to write their history but's afraid, like me? But I wanted to write it. I didn't want you to write it. I just wanted you to help me figure out
Right.
how to write it. So, how do you help someone like me?
First of all, we have to develop a trusting relationship. And they have to know that if they say something that they don't want mentioned, I won't mention it. Especially this is important if we're in a class together. You know,
Hmm.
everybody is has to promise to confidentiality. But if we're doing it one on one, then I have to ask you some really basic questions. Why do you want to write your story? Whom do you want to read it, if anybody? Why do you want those people to read it? What are you afraid of saying? So, a lot of people can't write because they have a lot of fear. They have a fear of, well, you know, what people call writer's block is really self criticism. And so they have the fear that they're not going to be able to do it well, or that people will ridicule them if they read it. That's really what writer's block is about. There's a fear of self-criticism and a fear of other people's criticism. So the way I deal with that is by listening intently
Hmm.
and encouraging them and praising them and giving them advice and asking them just to start writing a sentence. Just start with a sentence. Write why you want to write this book, who you want to read it, why you want them to read it. And the reasons why people may want to write a book are quite various. It's not completely obvious when you say you want to write a book, why you want to write a book. So can I tell you what some reasons are that people want to write their book?
Please, yes.
The most obvious reason is they want their children to read it, right? They want their descendants to understand how they came to be who they are today, the challenges they overcame, the negative things they wish they hadn't done or said. That's one thing. They want to pass their story on. There are other reasons people do this. Some people want a kind of catharsis. They want to revisit their past so they can get past certain challenges, internal challenges. Other people want to write their story in order to distinguish them from the family that they came from. So, for instance, I had a wonderful client once who was the daughter of the man who started the Oakland Zoo. And her father and her grandfather were celebrated naturalists in their day. This is like 100 years ago. They brought to common knowledge species no one had ever seen before. And when her father, Sidney Snow, started the zoo, he built the family home in the zoo. So she wrote her story. The kind of subtle message was, Dad, Granddad, you did these great things, but I grew up in a zoo, and nobody else did. And she recounted the many experiences she had with animals as a young person. For instance, after she got married and had her first child, they had an elephant. And one day she was strolling the pram across the lawn, and the elephant from afar saw her and started galloping towards her. And as soon as he came to her, he put on the brakes and took on the pram's handle and started pushing it himself. I mean, you can't make that up.
That's a good story.
You know, she may not even have thought of telling me if I hadn't been there to ask her. So that was another thing. So distinguishing yourself from the family is one thing. And another thing is self-forgiveness. People want to review their life and learn more self-acceptance and self-forgiveness. They may not even want anybody else to read that, but they need to write it.
I was going to say, I think that's a little bit of what was happening with me during that time, was that I wanted to tell this particular story of why I left Tennessee. And I was very afraid, as I told you, and just shared with everyone else. But it was also a release to forgive and to let go of it. And I did finally, years later, was able to forgive all of that and forgive myself as well and forgive the other people. But thank you for sharing that. I had never thought about that particular reason. Can you share maybe what's the most surprising reason you've ever heard that someone wants to write that?
You know, I think I've covered the major ones. A surprising one.
We actually have someone in the chat. Actually, Peter, our producer, wanted to see if I could invite him in for a minute. He has a question for you. Peter, you're welcome to join in.
Hi, Francine.
Hi, Peter.
When you speak, like when you talk about people looking to find self-forgiveness, and that's one of the reasons, first of all, that is totally a spiritual endeavor. And so you said you hadn't thought of it. That is, to me, like such a forgiveness for the outside doesn't really happen until people learn how to forgive the inside. You know what I mean? So, and I'm wondering how then, I assume the first question might be, what sort of things do you want to forgive yourself for? But I'm wondering how you kind of question the client, how you talk to them, what sort of questions you ask so that they, because I'm assuming they have to see forgiveness. You just don't want a laundry list.
Oh, no, I don't ask them, do they want to forgive themselves? I don't even approach it that way. So I follow two different mainstreams of approach. Do you want to write your story or tell your story chronologically? Or do you want to tell it episodically, focusing on certain areas of your life? And then I simply ask them to paint the scene for me. And where, when, who, what, why, all of those journalist questions. And all of that material comes out when they do that. I don't have to probe into their hearts with the screwdriver. It just comes out. It just comes out. Because I'm listening, and they're watching me listening, I think with care and interest. And they melt. People melt.
Sure. It becomes very emotional for them when they're sharing these
I've had people cry. Not very many, but it's happened. For instance, the lady I was telling you about who grew up in the zoo, when it came to having to talk about her husband's death, she started crying. And I let her cry. And I just let her cry. And then she goes on, she calms down and we go on. But getting people to cry is not my purpose.
Like Barbara Walters.
I'm just there to hold them. I'm just there to hold them when they go through that.
Do you ever find that as people are sharing their stories with you, that you realize they have a reason to want to write their story that is not what they first told you? Does that question make sense?
Yes, it's interesting. Let me think about that. Yes.
It sounds like you have an example.
So remember I told you that my first client was a man who I profiled in the Oakland Tribune, and then after that, so he started his business with a loan of $500 from his brother. And it exists today. He's deceased, but it exists today. It's called Bay Cities Produce. So I worked with Albert for 5 years. He had to tell his story over and over again. And I would say, we went through that. No, he had to tell it again. Okay, he had to tell it. That's what I was there for. In those 5 years, he told me that he had 2 daughters with whom he no longer spoke. They didn't speak to him. He didn't speak to them. 5 years ago, he has his 80th birthday party in a great venue somewhere in the East Bay, golf club. And I noticed over the years that he becomes more relaxed with me, more visible, easier to laugh at himself, more self-accepting. So at this great blowout birthday party, I enter, and there he is with his arms around his 2 daughters. You can't tell me that what we did together didn't help him.
Of course. Again,
I was trying to help him. I'm not a therapist. He was the therapist. I was just helping him write it.
Well, I go back. That's so spiritual. That your work is so much more spiritual than you may realize when I hear stories like that.
And Francine, that's holding space for people. That's being present with people, which is what we're taught in Unity, right?
Right.
So you're holding that space of goodness and of comfort and of capability for people. Because I know you did that for me. And that's very spiritual, very new thought as well.
Well, thank you very much. Now I've got wings, and you better get me before I fly up.
All right, I'll let you continue talking.
All right, thank you, Peter. Peter, that was a good question. Thank you. So, Francine, when you are coaching someone like you did with me in the group that we did, I didn't do independent just by myself. I did it with a group of people with you. But how, what's the process and how long do you work with them? I know what you just said, talking about getting started and why they do and why they don't end up writing it. But how long is the process that you work with them on? Is it just whatever it takes?
With an individual, you mean?
Yeah, with an individual.
They have to decide how long they want to talk.
Okay.
They have to, their story is something that they have formulated in their hearts how long they want to talk about it or write about it. Only in my classes do I have a limitation. Usually it's a six 1.5 hour classes. But one-on-one, it depends on how long they want to work.
What's the difference in time when you're working with a group class like you did with me?
Right. Well, when I'm working with a group class, like what I did with you, I have no way of knowing if people have actually finished their project. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they drop out. I had an interesting experience a couple years ago, the last time. There is a woman in my class who wrote, and this is all confidential, everybody says they're confidential, wrote a very long essay on the horrors that she had been through in her life. And it was very moving. And she then dropped out of the class. And she wanted her money back. And I said to her, there was quite a bit of back and forth, and I give her money back. She had signed up. I said, okay, I'm going to give you your money back because this class is all about cooperation and self-acceptance among us. And I don't want you in the class if you're going to be unhappy. But I think, Brock, what really happened, and I have no way of confirming this, is that she got so terrified of what she had spilled that she couldn't face it anymore. That's what I think happened. So, yeah, I don't know what happened to her. I felt bad about that, but people are their own therapists. Only she knew what she can handle.
I know for me personally, I know that after I took your class, I wrote and wrote and wrote for several weeks, and I kept writing, and I just would add to it every once. And I didn't finish it though. So I'm one of those people too. But what happened is that I ended up doing it through a workshop. And so what it instead of it becoming a book, it became a workshop, which I'm really enjoying teaching that because it's my ministry to do that. And
explain what the workshop is. Explain what is the workshop exactly.
Well, I have 3 workshops currently. One is a prayer workshop about the different types of prayer and how to pray and the feeling nature of prayer. And then the first one was the first diversity one was the language and understanding of diversity. And that was about just helping people understand terminology and history of the gay community, the LGBTQIA plus community and things of that nature. And then the third one, which I'm actually doing August 5th at the Unity of Vacaville, is navigating the path of diversity and religion. And we're going into the scriptures and we're finding out all about the translations and things of that nature and how to support people with the Bible rather than clobbering them with the Bible, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay.
But when I took your class, it was my intent to write that book. It truly was. And I still have it on my computer, and it's probably about 100 pages long at this time. But what it led to is me writing curriculum. And what it led to was me writing these workshops that I believe is my ministry. And I believe that the workshops will, at least in my mind, help me get out there more to help people than a book if someone buys it or not. So that's sort of where my mind frame went.
Well, I cheer you on, Brock. I cheer you on.
Thank you. So what about this? I know you've been doing this work for about 30 years. Is that right? Something like that?
I've been doing this for about 15 years. This
Okay.
particular work, 15 years. I was
So tell us.
for 30 years. I was a journalist for 30 years, and then I started
Okay.
doing this 15 years ago.
I see. What is, I guess, what is one of the things that really stands out to you? Maybe one of the clients that stands out to you that actually finished. Did they finish and they get that book published?
Yeah. So that last class I had a woman who was writing her life story, which I never read, but it inspired her to go on and write a children's book about God. And I don't know why she got that idea from me. I don't think she got the idea from me. I think she got the impetus from having been in my class, just as you did, right? Once you start writing and you feel that it's not crap, you keep on writing, and a spigot opens, right? And your heart comes out. So that's what an interesting product of my, yeah.
Thank you for that. And y'all, we've come up on a time. I'm sorry,
Can
Peter.
I ask one quick question? Francine,
Go
how
ahead.
many people actually make it to a published book, whether it's self-published or not?
So glad you asked that. And the answer is very few.
Very few. And do you speculate on why that is? Do people just need to get it out and then they're done, or they
That's one
get afraid?
reason. Another reason is they don't finish.
Yeah.
And I'm there if they want to finish. They can come and say, how can I finish this? Another reason is it's really difficult to publish. Now, if you're going to self-publish, that's an investment in time and money and labor. And it requires some amount of research to know how to do that, because there are all sorts of options for self-publishing. And if you want to go to a traditional publisher, that's even harder.
Sure.
Because traditional publishers publish memoirs only of celebrities.
Yeah.
So you have to be LeBron James or Michelle Obama or something like that. Right? Probably not Peter Millar. As important as I'm sure your memoir is fascinating, it probably won't.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
fair enough.
Y'all, we need to go to a break in just a few minutes, but actually in about a minute. I wanted to follow up on that. Francine, Peter has been a very dear friend to me, and he is helping me. Peter used to be an editor in San Francisco at different magazines, but I help Peter with his dogs, his doggy daycare and things like that every once in a while. And he actually I'll write my sermons, my messages for church, and then I'll give them to Peter. And Peter makes me sound so much better and so much more educated than I am. But but he actually helps edit my workshops, my writings, all those different types of things. So it's really good that we can do that with each other.
Bravo to both of you.
But we need to take a break real quick. Everyone stay with us. Don't turn your computer off or your phone off. We'll be right back in just a few minutes. We'll take about 2 minutes for a little break. You'll see some commercials. And we'll be right back at New Thought Media Network with Francine Bravetti.
Watch me change when you change the way you look at things. The things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
New Thought Radio, music from all your favorite New Thought artists. From Jamie Lula, Karen Drucker, Gary Lynn Floyd, Ricky Byers, Daniel Namath, Eddie Watkins Jr., and many, many more. 24/7 New Thought Radio. Positively inspiring.
And it looks like we're back from the break. Welcome back, everyone, to New Thought Media Network and Spiritual Toolkit. And my guest is Francine Bravetti. So we're back. Thank you, Francine. Thank you, Peter. I wanted to share with everyone what your website is again. It's Francine Bravetti, Brevetti. Is that correct?
That's correct.
FrancineBravetti.com. And while I was looking at your website, because I hadn't looked at that in a while, I saw a quote that you have on your website, and I want to share it with everyone if it's okay. And then I want you to sort of elaborate a little bit on it, if you would, because I think it's very interesting. But it's a short quote, and it says, and I believe this to be true, "I have heard it all, and I can tell it well." Tell us a little bit about that.
That's my quote. Because, you know, when you help people write your books, you're kind of like a confessor, right? People tell you things, and I help people write it. I either write it them myself for them, or I help them write it. So I think I've heard it all, and I've lived around the world a bit too, and so I lived in Hong Kong during a time when it was 12 years before the change of sovereignty to the PRC. So people had a lot of stories to tell. There was a lot of fear, especially in the business community, and families were breaking up. People were emigrating. Part of the family was emigrating. Expats were going back to their homes, like especially British. And so I've heard a lot of stories in my life, and I treasure them. Yeah, treasure.
What was that? How did that happen? How did you end up going to Hong Kong?
This is a really good story.
Well, tell it to us. Let us know.
I was working for the Journal of Commerce, a shipping paper in New York, covering foreign trade and finance. I had been there 7 years, and I could see I was going nowhere with this paper. In the meantime, we had a freelancer for the paper who was based in Hong Kong. And he came and visited us in New York, and we hit it off really well. And I, at one point, broached to him, "Do you think I could come work in Hong Kong?" He said, "Yes, come and help me." So he helped me emigrate to Hong Kong. He did all the paperwork for me and everything like that. There's quite a bit to do. And that's how I moved. And I meant to stay for a year. And after a year, I went back to New York and was so unhappy. I went back to Hong Kong and stayed for another 11 years after that.
What was it that What was it that you missed that made you want to go back, that you loved so much?
Well, first of all, the political situation was fascinating. It was like being on the porch step of a historical event, and it was. And I wasn't involved in it. I was just observing. It wasn't going to hurt me. And I was always interested in Chinese culture. I grew up in San Francisco. I was very interested in Chinese culture. I never studied it before I went to Asia. My background was in French and theater, but I was just, and I love Chinese art. I love pottery and calligraphy, and I studied Mandarin while I was there. So I was just involved. I'm just so involved in the culture, and that's why I went back.
Wow. What a wonderful life. What an adventure that was. And you stayed how long? You went back for another year? Is that what it was?
I went back for another 11 years. So I was there
Oh,
12 years. Oh,
oh my gosh. Wow.
I
I
left
had
in
no
80,
idea.
yeah, well, I left in 85, came back at the end of 97 after the transition had already happened. I was there to watch it happen. I was there to watch the governor of Hong Kong, Christopher Patton, hand over his authority to the Beijing government in a public ceremony, and I saw him cry.
And was it easy to get along there speaking English and all of that?
Very easy because the Hong Kongers had been a colony of Britain for 150 years. So many people spoke English. Not everybody, many people spoke English. And I was studying Mandarin. I should have studied Cantonese because at that time people spoke Cantonese. But I liked the sound of Mandarin better. I never mastered Mandarin, but I loved studying it. And I still to this day practice characters. Practice the yeah.
And we have a mutual friend in common, Joel, that's living, I believe it's Hong Kong, isn't it?
Yes.
And he's raising his daughter there.
But Joel, pardon me, I'm sorry. He what?
He's raising her daughter, his daughter.
Joy.
Mm-hmm.
But Joel, I have to tell you, is not living in the Chinese enclave of Hong Kong. He's living in a part where only mostly expats live. So
Oh, okay.
I was living in a Chinese neighborhood, and I feel a better cultural experience, a different cultural experience than he has. So there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I remember walking down the street one day because I was living, as I said, in the Chinese neighborhood, as most are, and I saw my reflection in the glass, and I said to myself, "Who is that white woman?" Yeah,
Well,
so
what a wonderful adventure that
yeah,
you had with that. Let's switch gears. I know this is going to be a little silly, but let's switch gears. I don't know where your little girl is, Rosa, but
Rosa,
Francine has the most beautiful doggie. Her name is
Rosa,
Rosa, and I think everyone knows how much I love dogs. But at any rate, during COVID, Francine got sick, and so I went over for about 2 weeks, or maybe a little bit longer, and walked her dog every day. And Francine lives in the Nob Hill area, and it was a treat to walk the dog, but it was also hard to go up and down all those hills. But there she is. Hi, sweetheart. Hi, Rosa. No.
Rosa's complete name is Rosa Calamitosa. And Calamitosa is Italian or Spanish for a big disaster. Because sometimes she's naughty, right? Are you naughty? Okay, she's naughty. I woke her up. Okay. Goodbye.
She's a sweet girl. Thank you for showing everybody. So,
Francine, I heard Brock tell you a little bit about my editing and writing experience. It sounds like you were probably more formally trained as a student in journalism and techniques. No? Oh.
On the job training.
Oh, good for you. That's how it happened for me. I actually learned the technical aspects of textbook publishing. I could computers. This is a long, long time ago. computers were finally taking over publishing and layout and all that. And I was skilled at that and fell in with textbook development.
Right.
And from there, I worked with a lot of writers and editors, and I learned lots of things. And I'd always been pretty articulate. But Brock shared with me a letterhead, a piece of paper that I guess you use in your classes that are some of your commandments or your tips for people. And I took the liberty of making some graphics out of them. I'm wondering if you would be interested in kind of talking about a few of your tips, and we'll look through them. Okay.
Yeah.
Give
We
me
would love
just 1 second.
And Peter, thank you for reminding me of that.
And then I'd like to talk to you about editing at some point.
Oh,
Sure.
okay. So this is the handout as Brock gave it to me. I assume what you do in class. It's a little hard to read, so I'm going to switch to this, and we'll go through the tips and spend as much time or as little time as you'd like to talk about them. And
Well, this I think is pretty self-evident. People don't know how to start, and I say just start anywhere. Start anywhere, and just keep writing. Eventually, your story will take shape. It may be a shape you want to change later, but eventually you will get the spigot turn on. You know,
okay.
the spaghetti machine will start.
I had a teacher it was high school, I believe, and then again in college, who said, if you want to write, you have to read everything you can possibly get your hands on. Also, which I'm not a good reader. I'm not as good a reader as I am a writer. Okay, tip 2.
Okay, so your openings, of course, don't expect to write your first sentence as the best sentence in the world. But when you are ready to publish and edit, your first sentence should be a magnet, right? It should draw people in, right?
Can you I know I'm putting you on the spot if I ask you to think of an example of what's really
No,
compelling.
I can't think of one right now.
Avoid It's a Dark and Stormy Night.
I can. Just a minute. Hold on.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's really interesting what makes for a sentence that grabs you, and really pulls you into the story.
Okay, I'm reading you the opening sentence of a novel called Mr. Churchill's Secretary by a woman named Susan Elia, I don't know, McNeil. Best opening sentence I have ever read. Maybe there are better ones, but I like this one. Half an hour before Diana Snyder died, she tidied up her desk in the typist's office of the cabinet war rooms. Bingo. I thought that was superb.
Yeah.
So this woman was Churchill's secretary, and it's putting you in the place where she is and leading you to want to read, well, how the hell did she die?
Die. Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Here. Tip number 3. Oh, this makes pretty good sense.
So if you're going to be writing about other people, even if it's your own story, you will definitely be writing about other people. You may even want to interview the other people in your life for their recollections, which will be totally different of your life than you have, by the way. So, where, who, what, where, when, how, why, saturate your head in who these people are.
Yeah. I find I'm one of 7 children. And so I'm trying to think off the top of my head, the age range is 12 years between, and, entire families evolve as time goes on. So I'm second to youngest. My recollections are so different from my older siblings in particular. It's always fascinating. when we get together and we share stories about what we remember when kind of things, and the differences and the nuance. Very interesting.
Absolutely. And even if it's your own story. I mean, I interviewed 2 women I went to grammar school and high school with, and they remembered my things about my family and my life I had one either no recollection of or a totally different impression about. So always, if you're writing about your life, interview other people who saw you.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. The next one?
Yes.
So-
Here, tip 4.
Mhm. Yeah, you need hours and hours.
Right. Well, it's like what we had
Yeah.
said before. You've got to
Right.
just write.
Yeah.
Read.
But don't let that stop you. Don't let some kind of artificial rule in your head stop you from starting. That's what.
So
And that's sometimes the hardest thing. I'm sorry, Peter. That's sometimes the hardest thing is to take that pencil or to be on your computer and to, what's the first word I want to write? Because I had that block. I totally understand that.
I think just an information dump. If just
Mhm.
write down whatever comes to
Right.
thought,
Mhm.
and you'll find it
Right.
yourself. I see. I think that's
Right.
okay.
Mhm.
Now this is interesting here, and I read your tip, so I know another tip a little bit down the line. But creative string of words and let that line pull you along. This I wanted to hear you talk a little bit more about.
Okay, I have to say that I did not create that quote. I stole it from someplace.
Okay.
That's okay.
But it's good advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you start a sentence and just let it suck the life out of you. Let it go on. Let it take you to the next memory, the next impression, the next whatever feeling. Just let it take you along.
I see. So this fits with tip number 4. Just write. Just start with that string of words and follow it.
Right.
Okay.
Do not criticize yourself while you're writing. Never edit while you're writing. Write the first draft without editing. This is so important because if you start editing, perfectionism will kill you. At this point,
I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Well, and I noticed that with the sermons that we've worked on and the workshops. It's just there's no bad ideas when you're starting out. Get it on paper. We can always edit it later.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know we've got about 10 minutes left. Peter, thank you for those questions. And Francine, thanks for those wonderful answers to help us understand better. We've got about a little bit less than, about 10 minutes left for the show. And Francine, I know that you wanted to speak a little bit about editing. So let's have it.
Yeah, well, I do want to say something about tip 6, though. I think this is
Sure.
important. And that is,
I can see it.
Can you see it, Brock? Tip 6 on the screen?
I can now. Yes, go ahead.
So I don't want a catalog of what you did from the 1st grade to 3rd grade or how you got your first, what things meant to you. And I want to know how you felt about them. And this is the most important thing in a memoir, not an agenda of your life's events. Okay, that's all I want to say about that.
Okay.
So about editing. So, Peter, there are 2 main streams of editing. One is line editing, meaning you correct the grammar, the spelling, the punctuation, all that stuff. And that's important to do. I like developmental editing, which means I critique the structure and the flow of your narrative. Okay? So if you've got a gap in your thinking, and I'll say, but what happened between and then? And no, this needs to go up there. No, you need a different way of getting into that section. That's the kind of thing I enjoy doing because it's practical.
Yeah, I am not a copy editor. I am. attention to detail is not my strong suit. If you could see my desk and my counters, it's like, don't touch anything because I know where I left it last. Don't clean anything. But yeah, what I find is, when I got involved with the textbooks and I had all of these, most of the writers and editors were retired school teachers. And so they had a certain amount of formal training, and specifically with what's appropriate for children at different levels and all that. And I just began to intuitively understand that there's a kind of a flow going on here and a rhythm. And of course, there's a lot of lead with the headlines in that kind of writing, big concepts first and then dissect and all that kind of stuff. And then I met a writer after that. I was working in like magazine publishing, and he's not a famous name or anything like that. He wrote for the gay community and subsets of the gay community, but I found his writing, every sentence just naturally led me into the next sentence. It was like, I don't know, having a chocolate milkshake through a straw. You just want to keep on going. It was so casual, and I didn't even notice that I was going to the next sentence. Sometimes reading feels tedious to me.
That's what every writer hopes to achieve.
Yeah, and so that was very inspirational for me, is to, quite frankly, wow, if I could write with a flow as good as his. And the other author that I really love, Bailey, is David Sedaris. I don't know if you're familiar with the humorist David Sedaris. I find his flow. I'm going to let you two chat for a minute. So
Please.
I think Brock has things he wants to say before we say goodbye.
Oh, I actually thank you, Peter, for taking care of those dogs. The life of dogs, y'all. Life with dogs, rather. I wanted to just a few more things. I know that you worked with Urban Angels. I worked with Urban Angels, and you haven't done that since the pandemic and everything. But I remember when it first started up, I would see you out there doing those tables and all those things and helping out. But that's a ministry also, Francine. You amazed me, and I really respected you. And it was part of seeing you and a few more people out there is why I ended up asking Nelson if I could come and do that with them as well. But what a wonderful thing. Give us just a little bit about why you did that.
I can't stand seeing people suffer or starve or not have enough to eat or put on. And Nelson Barry, who started Urban Angels, made it available and possible for me to help out. And I just love talking to people who are living on the street. They need to feel a human connection. They need to see you looking at them and smiling and saying, "How are you? What's happening with you today? How's your son? How's your dog?" They need this human connection. It gets me very upset when I understand how people avoid people on this homeless on the street because of fear.
It is.
They have nothing to fear. They have nothing to fear. They have only their humanity to share.
And they look away. They don't want to even think about it. But I know that because I saw all of y'all doing that, that was during the time when I was in seminary. And one of the things that I was required to do was to go out and be of service to the world. And so the very first thing I did was I asked a friend of mine who actually goes out and sees dogs if I could help him, but he didn't want a partner to go out with them. But at any rate, I called Nelson and I asked Nelson of Urban Angels, who is also a member of the Unity San Francisco, if I could help him, if I could go out. And he says he desperately needed the help because a lot of people quit during the pandemic. And I said, well, I've got gloves, I've got masks, let's go. And it turned into a wonderful ministry for me. I still go out. I don't go out with Nelson and Urban Angels now that we've moved over to the East Bay, but I do it over here on my own as part of my own Brock Ford Life Ministry. But I go out about twice a week and I sit with them, I hug them, I talk to them, I let them just tell me your story.
They need to be acknowledged as human beings.
Exactly. And they've become friends. I look forward to going and seeing them and sitting down and hearing how their week is. But it's a wonderful thing, and I saw that because of you and Nelson. So thank you all for not even knowing that you helped me get into that.
Good for you, Brock. By the way, people want to look it up. It's urbanangelsSF.org.
Thank you for telling them that. I didn't have that with me. urbanangelsSF.org, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. All right. So, Francine, we've got about 5 or 4 minutes left. What are some last thoughts that you would like to leave with people?
Tell me your heart. When you are writing, tell me your heart. What is it that you are bursting to say and express that you haven't felt an audience for? When I grew up, I wasn't allowed to express my thoughts. It's been my passion to help people express theirs. And that's how I got to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Francine. You're a light and a beautiful, wonderful person in this world. And I'm very grateful to know you and to call you my friend. So thank you. And I guess the last thing I want to ask you is, will you come back in a couple of months and let's go deeper?
Oh, please, let's do this.
I would love that. And we'll get Peter involved as well. He loves all the editing and writing and things of that nature. That's why he was speaking up today. So thank you for that, Peter, as well. But at any rate, Francine, thank you very much for joining our show. We've come to the end of it. I appreciate your participation and sharing such wonderful, helpful information. Thank you to all the viewers and the subscribers. And join us next week when we go behind the scenes with our producers of the show to learn more about them, their service to the world, and how they make New Thought Media Network truly a positive presence in the world. So thank you for joining us on New Thought Media Network. Check us out next week as well at 3 o'clock Pacific time. And y'all, thank you for being here. Francine, I love you so much. Thank you. And good night, everyone, and blessings to you all. Thank you.